Hello, my name is Wilfrido Terrazas. I'm a Mexican flutist, composer, and improviser, and I am an assistant professor at the University of California in San Diego. I prepared this brief presentation about my piece for solo prepared flute, Hexagram 57, which I composed in the year 2018. I hope you enjoy this presentation, and I thank you all for your attention and your kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, to be joining this very important conference. So thank you so much. I have prepared a short PowerPoint presentation, and so I'll get to that. And afterwards, I'm going to show the score of the piece to keep discussing a few of the features that the score has. So here we go. I will be sharing my screen now. So the piece name Hexagram 57 is a reference to the 57th of the hexagrams of the I-Ching, the ancient classic of changes from the ancient China. This work I wrote in 2018, and it's a work for solo prepared flute. And this is the topic of today's presentation. This piece I have performed several times. The world premiere took place in May 8th, 2018 at the university that I work in, UC San Diego in San Diego, California, United States. But I've performed this piece several other times in Stanford University, in San Jose Museum of Art, both in California. Also, the Mexican premiere was at the Encuentro Revueltas Sonoras in Cuernavaca, Mexico. I then played it also at the Escuela Superior de Música in Mexico City, at the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes, also in Aguascalientes, Mexico, and then at the Banff Center for the Arts and Creativity in Canada. After that, the Festival de Música Nueva in Ensenada, Mexico, which is my hometown, in Baja California in Mexico. And then not far from there at the Instituto de Investigaciones Culturales Museo UABC in Mexicali, Mexico. And finally in Mills College in Oakland, California. I would have done more performances of this piece, but due to the current COVID-19 pandemic, no other performances have been scheduled. There are also a few recordings. The official recording was just released by late 2020 on the very prestigious label, Mexico City-based label Zero Records. It's an album called Ítaca, which features several of my compositions for solo flute. And there's a few videos online. One in my personal channel, another one in the Inchipitsify channel, then other one by the Festival de Música Nueva Ensenada channel, and other one that kind of happens automatically through CD Baby. And then there's one more in SoundCloud in my own personal channel, and you can see all of them here at this slide. And so now some basic information about the piece. The piece, as I said, was composed in 2018 between the cities of San Diego and New York. I was on tour, and I got to write some of the piece while on tour, giving some concerts in New York City. It is an essay and composition improvisation, which is the way that I've been naming most of my compositions, my notated music for the last decade or so. What do I mean by that? Well, it's basically the score gives many possibilities to the performer, which is basically an improviser performer. And so the notation gives ideas for the performance, but it's basically up to the performer to make many decisions. Then circular breathing should be the basic form of breathing throughout the piece. This is also something that I've been working on for a number of years, for many years actually, to devise how to apply circular breathing to the flute. And also this particular piece features a preparation, which is explained in the score thus. And I'm going to read this to you. The flute should be prepared with a small and thin plastic membrane to be placed beneath the A key. For the membrane to vibrate properly, the performer plays depressing only the ring of the A key, leaving the hole open. The flute's sound should be notoriously affected by the buzzing of the membrane. So in a way, this preparation connects the Western flute to a sound that we can find much closer to certain Asian types of flutes, such as the Korean daegum or the Chinese diesel. It's not quite the same sound, but it is certainly similar. It kind of approximates that kind of timbre. And that's something I've been exploring for a good number of years. Then we have also the another feature of the piece, which is common to many of my recent pieces, which is mobile temporality. What's the idea of mobile temporality? And again, a quote from the score, which reads, "The total duration is not determined by the composer, since the temporality of the piece is mobile. This means that in rehearsals and or in performance, the performer should look for the temporality with which she or he feels most at ease with, as if trying to find a hidden oral tradition of the piece." So basically here, the idea is that the composer is not giving any information about temporality except for this quote. And how much should things last? It's entirely up to the performer. The idea of mobile temporality was first used in my ensemble work, Retrato de Walter Leama, from 2011 and 12, which is open work for an improvising ensemble of musicians. And so that's the first time that I came up with this idea. It's a clear influence. It takes clear influence from folk traditions. Just the way folk musicians approach temporality is very inspiring to me. They don't need metronomes or stopwatches or over rehearsing of stuff. They just kind of ease into the temporality that they find is the adequate for each piece. And they can also change it from performance to performance. And this idea kind of tries to answer a question that I've had for many years, which is that the idea that can a new or recently composed piece of music be played as if it were old and rich in all tradition and performance practices? So that's my answer to this question, which I've made myself for a long time. Another feature of this piece is its very unique form. Again, I have here a quote from the score, and I'm going to read it to you. The piece is written in 3 sections, 1, 2, and 3, containing potential musical materials to work with. They are conceived as growth modules, and which I'm going to get to in a minute. But contrary to prior pieces that I have written, the material in the sections can be freely combined. The performer decides whether to build an improvisation using material from all 3 sections, or to present each section as such, i.e. distinct from the others. In this case, the order of the sections is to be decided by the performer as well. The best choice, however, probably lies somewhere in between the 2 methods. So this is again a quote from the score, which gives an overview of how to deal with form, which is basically not said. And in that regard, this piece is freer or more open than most of my previous pieces. And also form here is not predetermined nor suggested as in most of my previous or even later pieces. So that's what happens with form. And another feature of this piece and many of my compositions is what I call growth modules. What are growth modules? They're a very particular kind of module. And I'm gonna read this quote from the score for you. The entire piece is written using a device called growth modules. These are platforms for improvisation. They contain certain material which acts as a point of departure to improvise, as the roots of a rapidly growing plant. The stems, leaves, and flowers do not necessarily resemble the roots, but they stem from them. The general idea is that growth modules work in a similar way to how the improviser's memory would in a normal improvisation. In this piece, each section is a growth module. Some material in them can be, of course, left out. The order of the material within any given growth module can be changed at will if desired. The verbal instructions at the beginning of the growth modules define their general musical character and give ideas for their interpretation. So, and I'm going to show this in the score in a couple of minutes. So the material proposed in growth modules is just there as an idea, as a point of departure, but performers can leave stuff out. Some material can be left out. The order of the material can also be changed at will. And there are some verbal ideas there that also can help define and guide the interpretation. Growth modules have been appearing in my pieces for nearly a decade now. The first work that featured them was a collection of 9 pieces for solo flute called Ítaca, Viaje para un Flautista from 2012. And there's many influences for that, such as other modular notations of Western coinage, but in particular, the notation used by Mexican composer Ignacio Bacalovera, with whom I have collaborated for many years. And perhaps a greater influence comes from jazz notations, the so-called charts or lead sheets, in which the material is presented, but performers are not supposed to read the material in the way it's notated. It's just, again, a point of departure to do stuff with it. And also by its derived musical culture known as as creative music, the African-American creative music, in particularly the work of people like Roscoe Mitchell, with whom I've also collaborated, and Anthony Braxton. And so here is very present the idea of notation as a springboard for improvisers, which is a common idea in literature related to these musical cultures. Some other features that you can find in the notation are this idea of cluster notation, which happens whenever 2 simultaneous pitches are connected to a vertical line. The activity to be performed should include also all or most of the pitches contained in between the ones written. Again, these are just suggestions, ideas. This idea of quote unquote polyphony, in which there's this strange polyphonic writing, but it only indicates possibilities of potential voicing and not a real sounding result. I invite here performers to find creative solutions and surprise themselves. And then this glissando, quasi-glissando notation, which is just used as a means to depict something which is highly connected and not necessarily should be taken literally as a glissando effect. There are basically two kinds, which are straight glissandi lines, which indicate a rather direct connection between 2 things, and undulating lines, which indicate a preference for indirect connection. And finally, fluctuation arrows, which are double-headed arrows, which indicate an irregular and or free fluctuation between 2 poles. And then finally, some performance strategies that I can advise performers who would like to address these kinds of scores. And in this case, because this is a piece for solo flute, this is a piece that I wrote to play myself, which does not mean that other flutists could not play it, but so far I've only played it myself. But still, these would be strategies devised for any performer who would wish to take on any kinds of these kinds of scores. So the first idea is that because this is a composition improvisation, it would require then improvisation interpretation. So you see the performance here requires the performer to think as an improviser. And contrary to most pieces in the concert or quote unquote concert music tradition, of like Western concert music tradition, in these kinds of pieces, performers need to bring into the piece everything they are. So their personal sound world, their improvisatory skills, their memory, their experience, and so on. and not leave their personal vocabulary out of the performance. By doing so, a fusion naturally occurs between the performer's personal vocabulary and the material suggested by the notation. So the result, which is always fascinating to me, is this kind of new third musical world in one that I could not have devised by myself. So it's the addition between what I wrote and what the performer is bringing into the piece. This also happens up to a certain degree with pieces that I write to perform myself, such as Hexagram 57, which is also always exciting. And this is something that I was, of course, not expecting at first when I started writing these kinds of scores. I just assumed that because it was my piece that it would be simple and easy to perform. But I had to learn how to practice these kinds of pieces, how to improvise over the material that I had written. And this actually took some time. And in my experience, what most performers mirror my own original experience. And usually the first version is kind of shy. It takes some time for performers to quote unquote own the piece and get really into the piece and be at ease with it and feel free to bring their own musical worlds, their own vocabularies into the performance of the piece. So the notation facilitates further exploration of the possibilities of the material, even after a first performance. There's always room for negotiation between fixity, and flexibility. And here, again, this is one advantage of notation for improvisers in this kinds of pieces, is that you don't really strive to make a quote unquote version. Like once you do it for the first time, it keeps, the notation keeps giving you room for further elaboration of the possibilities. Sometimes I say to other performers of my music, read less, interact more, be open to contingencies. And to keep in mind that notation is just a point of departure to improvise. No notated materials are absolutely indispensable in these kinds of scores. So I'm stopping the share now. And I would like to show some of these ideas in the actual score before I finish the presentation. So here we have it. This is the score, yeah, we can. This is the cover, and we can go. These are the instructions. Some of them I already read. These are the explanations of the guidelines to perform it. And here are other symbols and an epigraph. I usually use epigraphs for my pieces. In this case, this is a poem by Tang Dynasty Chinese poet Wang Wei in the beautiful translation by David Hinton. And so here are the three parts of the piece. This is part one, suggesting the idea of calling, invoking. This is part two, growing, morphing, and part three over here, which is always playing with multiphonics and forte to triple forte. And it features this tablature notation. So here are some suggested fingerings to explore to obtain really strong multiphonics, in which the membrane of the flute preparation really has a very strong bresence. The other two parts of the piece feature a little bit of a more conventional flute notation, but remember that all of these are just growth modules. So number one is a growth module, and the performer can start the piece wherever, because here you can freely combine. You can actually start in number one, number two, or number three, and at any place, and you don't have to play the whole thing. And so here are some ideas that we already talked about. This kind of polyphonic writing, this just shows possible ways of going through the piece. Not necessarily you have to play all of this, right? So this is kind of how the piece works. It's a little bit like an interactive map, but the path needs to be determined by the performer themselves. So thank you all so much for your attention. Again, my name is Wilfrido Terrazas. It's a pleasure to participate in this great conference. Thank you all so much, and hasta luego.